Tonight, counting the cost of medical justice.
Well, his actions that day have ruined my life. But I have to deal with what I've got and focus on survival.
And how legal aid can change lives.
If we're careful and we manage, he's going to be comfortable and he's going to have the things he needs. And at the end of the day, that's all that we wanted.
Good evening and welcome to the Tonight programme. Plans to cut the legal aid budget by £350 million could mean thousands of people, including victims of medical accidents, missing out on financial help to fight civil lawsuits. Critics have warned that in cases of clinical negligence, many people won't be able to afford to pursue the life-changing damages they desperately need. On tonight's programme, Morland Sanders asks, what price justice?
It's a tragic, preventable situation that happens surprisingly frequently in our hospitals. A patient in for a routine procedure suffers a life-threatening injury caused by clinical negligence. A situation that can often completely devastate a family. In the past 12 months alone, more than 8,500 claims of clinical negligence have been brought against the NHS in England. When medical accidents happen, families demand to know exactly what happened and who was responsible. Legal aid has allowed thousands of victims to search for those answers and to begin the hunt for financial compensation. But plans to change the system mean many cases will no longer qualify for legal aid, leaving families to question who can they turn to. Fighting a clinical negligence case can often be complex, demanding reports of many medical experts and costing hundreds of thousands of pounds over a number of years. So legal aid funding, available to those on low incomes, has given people access to justice for their or their loved one's injury.
People most of all want to have some form of accountability, an explanation about what happened and why, but there's no getting away from the fact that many people also need compensation.
Legal aid funds around 16% of all clinical negligence cases. However, it's responsible for financing almost 75% of the most serious cases involving birth injuries. To be eligible for legal aid today, a family has to have less than £8,000 savings and a gross monthly salary of under £2,657. So legal aid has often been a safety net for those unable to afford costly legal bills. A safety net that could be taken away later this year. A situation of great concern to many, including Rick and Julie Green.
Hello.
15 years ago, Julie had enjoyed an ideal pregnancy, and both she and husband Rick were looking forward to the birth of their first child.
I went to all the antenatal clinics, I did all the doctor's checks, all the midwives' checks, didn't miss anything at all, and everything was fine.
However, their son Andrew was 14 days late, and the hospital eventually decided to perform a caesarean section.
The decision was taken on a Sunday morning. I don't really know why they didn't do it straight away. We've been told since then that once a decision's been made, the hospital staff are supposed to perform the section within 40 minutes, but I didn't actually get the section until 9 o'clock at night.
The delay in Andrew's delivery meant he suffered severe injuries. He was choked by his own umbilical cord and starved of oxygen for approximately 8 minutes.
We're told that we'd actually be lucky if he wasn't a vegetable and not to expect anything of him, really.
The Greens decided to look into the possibility of legal action for negligence during Andrew's birth.
We did contact a local solicitor who said, you don't stand a chance, there's no point at all, you're never going to win against the NHS.
Eventually, though, the Greens found a lawyer willing to take the case on through the legal aid system. At that point, what were you looking for, Rick?
I just wanted somebody to blame for it, a face to say, look what you've done to my son. I was trying to be Andrew's champion.
The case was eventually settled in 2005, with the trust admitting that Andrew's injuries were a consequence of a negligent delay in his delivery. Once the settlement was approved in court, Andrew received a 7-figure compensation payout. By then, he'd been diagnosed as having cerebral palsy and had severe difficulties. The Greens agreed a lump sum that allowed them to move into a larger bungalow better suited to Andrew's needs.
Originally we lived in a terraced house, so we had to carry Andrew up the stairs. The bathroom was unsuitable. There's no back garden as such.
Arms down again.
Andrew has also been able to pay for private care, which has transformed the life of a boy whose parents were told would never walk or talk.
Lift your right leg up again. Fabulous. And down again.
And he's all too aware how important the money has been for him.
The money has gone towards speech therapy and facilities for me. So again, my speech won't be like it is today.
If we're careful and we manage, he's going to be comfortable and he's going to have the things he needs. And at the end of the day, that's all that we wanted.
The legal costs in their 7-year fight for justice totalled £91,000, a sum clearly out of reach for most families. How crucial was legal aid in allowing you to bring this case?
We wouldn't have managed without it, definitely not.
That legal aid funding has allowed Andrew to develop into a remarkable young man who has taken some of his GCSEs early and started up his own internet business.
He's exceeded everybody's expectations. To be told when he was first born that he would never walk or talk, and then to see him now, he can talk. He definitely expresses his opinion, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And one man who can testify to that is David Cameron, after Andrew personally delivered a letter of protest about the government's planned cuts to legal aid. Can I have a quick read? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thanks. And you delivered this in person?
Yeah, I sure did. I've documented everything I've gone through and what other people will be missing out on if they do cut legal aid.
In the past 12 months, the NHS has paid out more than £620 million in damages to victims of clinical negligence. Of that figure, £220 million was paid to victims of birth injury like Andrew, cases mostly funded by legal aid.
What will happen if these reforms go forward unchanged is that many people simply won't be able to afford to hold the NHS or other healthcare providers to account. Mistakes that have caused serious harm will go unrecognised and uncompensated.
And clinical negligence isn't the only area being taken out of scope for legal aid. The proposed cuts, part of the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Bill, will mean that people will not be able to use legal aid to fight disputes in a number of civil law areas. To find out why these cuts are being proposed, I visited the Ministry of Justice.
The entire legal aid market is costing this country £2.2 billion a year, and we do feel that that is excessive. It is much more than anywhere else in the world is spending, and we do think it needs to be cut. Legal aid should be restricted to provided legal help to vulnerable people whose liberty or security is at immediate risk. And so we're moving away from giving legal aid to people who want to have financial gain.
The government estimate that taking clinical negligence out of scope for legal aid will save £17 million. However, they are also setting aside £6 million to fund what they term exceptional clinical negligence cases through legal aid.
Through the exception scheme, a third of those cases will come back into the net, because we do accept that ultimately human rights comes into this, and that there will be cases where the state does need to step in and provide legal aid ultimately. These will be the most sensitive cases, typically brain damage type cases, the very worst cases.
How will that work? Who will decide which cases are approved?
Well, under the proposed new law, the decision will be taken out of the hands of ministers, where it currently lies, and it will be given to an independent director who will make the decision rather than ministers.
However, there are concerns over how this exceptional legal aid funding scheme will work.
There are exceptional funding routes at the moment. The overwhelming feedback we've had is that exceptional funding is very rarely granted. It is yet another hoop that a deserving and needing family would have to go through.
And for many such families, it's been the availability of legal aid which has helped to improve their quality of life.
Both children suffered brain damage and they've both got cerebral palsy, and that was a result of clinical negligence.
As a result of the hospital's negligence, my daughter suffered brain hemorrhage.
The compensation enabled me to get this wheelchair, and that is unbelievable.
If there's no legal aid, justice just becomes for the rich, for the elitists, and not for the man on the street, and I don't think that's fair.
Without legal aid, Alex wouldn't have funds available to better his life.
It has given me the ability to bring justice for my daughter.
Without legal aid, I would have been a prisoner.
At least he's financially secured.
I'm quite shocked that the government's looking to actually cut legal aid.
No amount of money is going to replace what they've lost, but it's going to make sure that their futures are secure and that they're looked after properly.
In place of legal aid, victims of clinical negligence are being told to go out and find themselves a no-win, no-fee lawyer. However, a proposed crackdown on the amount of money they can charge the NHS means many lawyers could close their doors for business.
Under no-win, no-fee arrangements, claimants can take forward a case in the knowledge that they're not going to have to pay any fees to their lawyer in the event that they lose. Even if they win, the lawyer's fees are recovered from the opposing side.
Now the government are proposing to change how much of their legal costs lawyers can claim from the opposing side, potentially making many cases unattractive to take on.
If the reforms go ahead as currently proposed, approximately 50% less cases will be viable for being taken forward.
In clinical negligence, the defending side is usually the National Health Service. And according to some, the legal costs they have to pay out in fighting cases are far too high. In the past 12 months, the NHS spent £69 million on their own lawyers defending clinical negligence cases. However, they also had to pay out over £172 million to claimant lawyers. Steve Walker of the NHS Litigation Authority believes those costs are too disproportionate.
If our standing costs were added to our legal costs, it would go some way towards bridging the gap, but it would go nowhere near to closing the gap. It's currently about £100 million per annum, and it's rising. Anything that we spend on costs ought probably to be being spent on patient care and welfare.
And instead of going into lawyers' pockets, that £100 million could fund 650 hospital beds for a full year.
Some people would argue with a lot of justification that there's been an explosion of costs and that success fees in some instances could be described as having gone through the roof.
A success fee is a bonus that no-win, no-fee lawyers can charge a losing defendant.
The lawyer acting for the successful claimant can claim their hourly rate, which is already high in relation to the rate we pay our defence lawyers, and they can claim what's called a success fee, an uplift of up to 100%. So effectively, someone who might be claiming £450 an hour can claim at £900 an hour.
And these success fees can add tens of thousands of pounds to an already expensive lawsuit for the NHS. It is these charges that the government are proposing to stop lawyers recovering from the NHS. They hope this will reduce legal costs, potentially making lawyers think twice about taking a case on. In the future, this could have a profound impact on the likes of Andrew Brown. Andrew was a CNN journalist who I worked with in Hong Kong. He often tackled very daring and physically challenging news stories.
A journey from one tower to the opposite tower is about 1.5 kilometres.
Some years ago, I was shocked to find out that he had been the victim of a severe medical accident after noticing problems with his coordination.
I went to a doctor and I was shocked to find out that I had a tumour right in the middle of the cord.
Surgery was a success, but Andrew suffered complications in the second day after his operation.
I woke up in the morning and I turned my head and there was this very intense pain. It felt like something had snapped in my neck.
Andrew was looked at by his surgeon, but told that the pain was normal after the op. 20 minutes later, Andrew began to feel even worse and pleaded with the hospital staff to contact his surgeon again.
It turned out that he had gone to the local rail station. He received a call that told him that I had lost all feeling in my hands and my feet, which is a classic symptom of creeping paralysis. After he hung up from that call, he got on the next train and could not be contacted for the next 3 hours. By the time he was contacted, I was quadriplegic.
A clot had formed which was compressing on Andrew's spine. He was eventually re-operated on, hours later. However, the damage was done. Andrew was paralysed.
His actions that day have ruined my life. But I have to deal with what I've got and focus on survival.
Andrew contacted a lawyer who agreed to take on his case under a no-win, no-fee agreement. However, it was a complex situation.
All the way through, the other side maintained that actually, even if Andrew had been re-operated on much sooner on the day when the blood clot started compressing his spine, he still would have ended up paralysed.
After a 4-year fight, Andrew's claim was settled just before it was due to go to trial. He received £4.5 million in damages. The £4.5 million, was that a figure that you feel was correct in your case?
We had maybe a dozen experts evaluating my condition, trying to figure out how long I was going to live, therefore how much money I would need, what kind of medical treatment, what kind of therapy I would need.
And the loss of potential earnings, you had a great job, a top job.
Initially the defence said that they weren't going to give me very much money at all for being a CNN reporter, and it was only under intense pressure from my lawyers that they eventually caved in.
What does that £4.5 million, what does that allow you to do?
It allows me to get a good quality of medical care. For instance, what I was doing in the pool is expensive, but it really helps me. You don't get better quickly. Even small advances can make a huge difference. For instance, over the last 2 years, I've learned to walk a short distance, so I've gone from being completely dependent on a wheelchair to being partially independent.
Another potential impact of the government's proposals is that instead of claiming success fees from the NHS, lawyers will be entitled to take up to 25% of their legal costs from clients' damages.
In Andrew's case, between £375,000 and £500,000 of the legal costs under the new regime have to come out of Andrew's damages.
To compensate for this, the government are proposing to increase general damages by 10%, but that could still leave victims shortchanged.
It's only part of the damages awarded. In Andrew's case, the increase in damages would make a difference of about £18,000. So on the one hand, we get an increase of about £18,000, and on the other hand, he would lose somewhere between £375,000 and £500,000. It hardly makes up for it.
Critics are concerned that the proposed changes will deter lawyers from fighting tricky cases like that of Andrew's. If Andrew came to you under the new regulations, do you think you'd still take that case on?
I'm not sure I would, no. There are two aspects to Andrew's case. You have to show negligence, and you then have to draw a causal link between the negligence and the outcome. Quite honestly, I would probably have to say, I'm sorry, Andrew, it's too difficult.
The worry is that these reforms, coupled with the loss of legal aid, could impact on people's access to justice. But that's not something that everybody buys into.
I think that few, if any, people will be denied access to justice. And most, if not all, claimant lawyers who are currently working in this field will still be working in it, but they'll have changed their business model. And they might be making less profit. We've thought since the inception of No Win, No Fee that it was a potentially expensive way to deal with litigation. And that has proven to be the case.
Over the past 7 years, total claimant lawyer costs have risen dramatically, while the NHS own defence costs have shown modest increases. And there have been extreme examples of claims from some no-win, no-fee lawyers, which the NHS consider excessive. Take the lawyer who collected a client from an airport for a return journey for a medical appointment. For that, the bill to the NHS for an 8-hour day was £2,000. Add the success fee and it was £4,000. A deep vein thrombosis case settled for £27,500, yet a legal bill of £104,000. And an amputated toe, £26,500 in compensation, £220,000 in claimed costs to the NHS.
I would make the distinction between that which I think was verging on the dishonest, or certainly milking the system, as compared to the ordinary hourly rate being uplifted, which we think is entirely legitimate, but shouldn't be an option.
Yet lawyers argue that it's these success fees which allow them to take on many cases in the first place.
The success fees are there to make up for the fact that lawyers are expected to work for nothing.
Their argument is that no-win, no-fee lawyers can spend lots of time researching cases before deciding to take them on. In Andrew Brown's situation, the facts were investigated for over a year before it was decided that he had a strong case. If it had been dropped, the lawyers wouldn't have been paid a penny.
About 50% of the people who we say to, we'll look at your case, we'll investigate it, we will eventually have to say, we're sorry, but we don't think your case has sufficiently good prospects of success.
But that's screening it. That's just a part of being a no-win, no-fee lawyer, isn't it?
Yes, but if you take away the part that says, if you do work for nothing, eventually, somehow you'll get paid back for some of that time. We never recover all of that time. Then we can't do the work for nothing.
It's a difficult balance. Most would rather see NHS funds being spent on patient care rather than legal costs. However, it's also vital that victims of medical accidents have access to the legal system to help ease their constant suffering. Just ask Andrew Brown.
I am often miserable, mainly because of the pain. It never switches off. You can't really know what you have until you've lost it. But when you lose it, oh my God, it's hell on earth.
Over the coming weeks, a committee of MPs will continue to scrutinise the legal aid funding proposals and report back to the House of Commons in October. Now, if you'd like more information on tonight's programme, please visit our website at itv.com/tonight. Until next time, though, good evening and thanks for watching. Coming up next week, nearly 2 decades on from the war in Bosnia, Penny Marshall returns to the country. She finds out what became of the terrified prisoners she discovered in 1992 and traces the man whose image shocked the world.